The evening was buzzing with excitement. It wasn't just any ordinary night, it was the kind of event where everyone wanted to be seen. Picture this: a grand ballroom in downtown Manhattan, all lit up like something out of a movie. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting shimmering reflections on polished marble floors. Outside, sleek black cars pulled up one after another, dropping off guests dressed to impress. Designer suits, sparkling gowns, and enough jewelry to make you do a double take. This wasn't just some random party. It was an exclusive gala hosted by one of the biggest tech companies in the world. They were unveiling their latest innovation, a cutting-edge artificial intelligence platform that promised to change the game. The guest list? Only the crème de la crème. Think CEOs, celebrities, influencers, and industry leaders who could afford to drop 6 figures on a watch without batting an eyelid. Among these high-profile attendees was a woman whose name had been making waves recently. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege, but she'd clawed her way to the top through sheer grit and determination. Her story was the stuff dreams were made of. Starting as a small-time entrepreneur working out of her tiny apartment, she turned her little startup into a billion-dollar empire. People admired her not just for her business acumen, but also because she broke barriers every step of the way. She was a black woman in a field dominated by men, and yet here she was, standing tall among giants. Dressed in a stunning gown that hugged her curves perfectly, she stepped out of her car under the bright flashes of cameras. Reporters shouted her name, trying to get her attention. "Over here," one yelled. Another asked, "How does it feel to be part of such a historic event?" With a warm smile, she waved briefly before walking toward the entrance. This was her moment, and she carried herself like someone who knew exactly how far she'd come. But even as she walked confidently toward the doors, there was no way she could have predicted what was about to happen next. You see, sometimes life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. And tonight, inside that glittering venue filled with power players and dreamers alike, things were about to take a turn nobody saw coming. As she approached the entrance, flanked by photographers snapping away like paparazzi at a red carpet premiere, everything seemed normal, at first glance. But lurking beneath the surface of this glamorous evening was a tension waiting to boil over. Little did anyone know within minutes the carefully curated facade of this luxurious event would crack wide open, exposing something ugly hidden underneath, something that would leave jaws dropping, phones buzzing, and social media ablaze. And so, as our protagonist took those final steps toward the doorway, unaware of what awaited her, the stage was set for a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the confines of that glittering ballroom. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't the ones we plan, they're the ones we never see coming. This expanded version keeps the tone natural, simple, and engaging, while setting the scene vividly for readers or viewers. Let me know if you'd like me to expand further. The air outside the venue was electric, buzzing with excitement as guests arrived one after another. But for her, the evening took an unexpected turn just as she reached the entrance. She had barely placed her foot on the red carpet leading to the door when a tall, broad-shouldered security guard stepped forward. His posture was stiff, almost intimidating, and his expression gave nothing away. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a tone that was firm but not exactly friendly. "Can I see your invitation?" She paused mid-step, taken aback by the question. For a moment she thought maybe she'd misheard him. After all, she wasn't just any guest. She was someone who had been personally invited by the event's host. Her name should have been on every list, every clipboard, every digital record they had prepared for the night. Yet here she stood, being questioned as though she didn't belong. With a calm smile, she replied, "Of course, my name is—" But before she could finish, the guard interrupted her. "I'll need to check," he said curtly, cutting her off. He glanced down at his clipboard, scanning the names written there. His brow furrowed slightly as if he were searching for something he couldn't find. Then, without looking up, he added, "You'll need to wait here while I confirm." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and awkward. Around them, other guests continued to stream into the venue without so much as a second glance from the same security team. Men in tailored suits and women dripping in diamonds, walked past effortlessly, their invitations seemingly accepted without question. No one else seemed to be stopped or asked to prove themselves. She felt her stomach tighten, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. On one hand, she wanted to believe this was just a harmless misunderstanding, a simple clerical error that would be cleared up quickly. On the other hand, deep down, she knew better. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to her. It wasn't even the 10th time. Over the years, she'd grown accustomed to moments like these, where people assumed she didn't belong because of the color of her skin or the way she looked. Each time it stung a little more than the last. Forcing herself to stay composed, she tried again. "I assure you, my name is on the list. I was personally invited by the host. If you'd like, I can call him right now to verify." Her voice remained steady, polite even, but there was an edge to it, a quiet determination that refused to back down. The guard finally looked up from his clipboard, meeting her gaze for the first time. There was no apology in his eyes, no hint of regret for the inconvenience he was causing. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "Hold on a moment," before stepping aside to radio someone inside. As she waited, the murmurs began. A small crowd had gathered nearby, some curious, others whispering among themselves. Someone pulled out their phone to capture the scene, and soon enough the incident was live-streamed for the world to see. Hashtags started trending online almost instantly. "Respect her," "Are not your stereotype," "Stop racial profiling." The room, or rather the internet, was ablaze with opinions. Standing there under the bright lights, surrounded by judgmental stares and hushed conversations, she felt a wave of frustration wash over her. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. She hadn't dressed up in her finest gown, braved the paparazzi, and driven across town to stand outside arguing with a security guard. She came here to celebrate an achievement, to connect with peers, to enjoy the fruits of her hard work. And yet, once again, she found herself having to fight for her place in a space where she clearly belonged. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. Finally, the guard returned, holding his radio close to his ear. Whatever he heard must have been convincing enough, because his demeanor shifted ever so slightly. "You're clear to go in," he muttered, gesturing toward the door. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the discomfort he'd caused. Just those 4 short words, delivered with the same detached professionalism he might use to direct traffic. She hesitated for a split second, considering whether to say something, to call him out for his behavior or demand accountability, but decided against it. Tonight wasn't about him. It was about proving her worth, both to herself and to everyone watching. So with her head held high and her shoulders squared, she walked through the doors and into the glittering ballroom beyond. But as she disappeared into the crowd, the tension lingered behind her. The whispers grew louder, the cameras clicked faster, and the social media storm intensified. What had started as a minor hiccup at the door was quickly spiraling into something much bigger, something that would force everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, privilege, and respect. And unbeknownst to her, the real drama was only just beginning. The woman stepped into the grand ballroom, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She tried to shake off the awkwardness of what had just happened outside, but it clung to her like a shadow. The room was alive with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses filled with champagne. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, casting warm light over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. It was supposed to be a magical evening, a celebration of innovation and success. But for her, the magic had already been tainted. As she moved further into the space, trying to blend in with the crowd, someone approached her. It was the host of the event, a well-known figure in the tech world. He looked flustered, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an air of urgency. "I'm so sorry about what happened," he said quickly, his voice low but sincere. "That shouldn't have happened. Not to you, not to anyone." She gave him a small, tight smile. "It's fine," she replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. Deep down, she appreciated the apology, but words felt hollow compared to the sting of being questioned at the door. Still, she didn't want to make a scene. This wasn't the time or place for confrontation. Instead, she nodded politely and allowed him to guide her deeper into the venue, introducing her to other attendees as if nothing had gone wrong. But outside, the fallout was already brewing. News of the incident spread faster than wildfire. One guest who had witnessed the exchange posted a video online, capturing the tense moment between her and the security guard. In the clip, you could see her standing calmly, explaining herself, while the guard remained unmoved. The video went viral, within minutes sparking outrage across social media platforms. People were quick to point out the obvious. Why was she stopped when others walked right in without a second glance? Comments poured in from all corners of the internet. Some defended the security guard, saying he was just doing his job and couldn't recognize every face on the list. Others argued that this wasn't about following protocol, it was about prejudice. They pointed out how often Black individuals, especially women, are subjected to unnecessary scrutiny simply because of their appearance. The hashtag, #RespectHer, began trending, accompanied by stories from people sharing similar experiences of being profiled or dismissed in professional settings. Back inside the ballroom, whispers rippled through the crowd. Guests huddled together discussing what they'd seen or heard about online. A few approached her directly, offering support. "I can't believe that happened to you," one woman said sympathetically. "You handled it so gracefully." Another man chimed in. "This is exactly why we need more diversity in leadership positions. Things like this wouldn't happen if decision-makers reflected the real world." While some reactions were supportive, others were defensive. A group of older men near the bar muttered among themselves, blaming cancel culture for blowing the situation out of proportion. "It's not like he meant anything by it," one of them said dismissively. "People are too sensitive these days." Their comments only fueled the growing divide, highlighting the stark contrast in how different people viewed the same event. Meanwhile, the host of the gala found himself in a tricky position. As the organizer of the event, he knew the spotlight would soon turn to him. Social media users were already tagging his company, demanding answers. How could something like this happen at such a high-profile gathering? Wasn't there supposed to be training to prevent racial profiling? The pressure mounted, and it became clear that ignoring the issue wasn't an option. Behind the scenes, staff scrambled to address the situation. Someone suggested issuing a public statement, while another proposed reaching out to her privately to offer compensation or some form of restitution. But before any concrete plan could be put into action, the decision was made for them. The CEO of the hosting company arrived unexpectedly, having been alerted to the chaos unfolding both online and offline. With a stern expression, he called the security guard aside for an urgent conversation. "What were you thinking?" the CEO demanded, his voice sharp with frustration. "Do you realize who you stopped at the door?" The guard shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard by the intensity of the reaction. "I was just following procedure," he stammered. "I didn't recognize her name and I needed to confirm." "You didn't recognize her name," the CEO interrupted, incredulous. "She's one of the most accomplished entrepreneurs in the industry. Her face has been on magazine covers. You let your bias cloud your judgment and now it's reflecting poorly on all of us." The room fell silent as everyone nearby turned to watch the exchange. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. For the guard, the weight of the situation hit him hard. He hadn't intended to cause harm, but good intentions weren't enough to undo the damage. Within moments, the CEO delivered the verdict, "You're fired," effective immediately. The announcement sent shockwaves through the venue. Some cheered quietly, relieved that swift action had been taken. Others frowned, questioning whether firing the guard solved anything. After all, he was just one person acting within a system that often perpetuates inequality. Removing him from the equation didn't erase the underlying problem. For the woman at the center of it all, the news came as both a relief and a burden. On one hand, accountability was important. She deserved to feel safe and respected in spaces where she belonged. On the other hand, watching someone lose their job over a single mistake left her conflicted. Was justice truly served? Or had the situation spiraled out of control? As the night wore on, the tension lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. Conversations buzzed around her, some congratulating her resilience, others speculating about what would happen next. Through it all, she remained composed, masking her emotions behind a practiced smile. But inside, she couldn't help but wonder, would this incident lead to real change, or would it fade away as just another headline? And somewhere in the back of her mind, she realized that this wasn't just her story anymore. It had become a symbol, a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Whether she liked it or not, the events of the evening had set something in motion, something bigger than her, bigger than the gala, bigger than the guard who had unwittingly ignited a firestorm. The aftermath of the incident unfolded like a storm that refused to settle. Within hours, the story had exploded online, with millions of people weighing in on what happened at the gala. Social media timelines were flooded with opinions, debates, and heated discussions. Some praised the swift decision to fire the security guard, calling it a necessary step toward accountability. Others argued that while his actions were wrong, firing him wasn't the solution. It didn't address the deeper issues of bias and discrimination embedded in systems everywhere. For her, the woman who had been stopped at the door, the whirlwind of attention was overwhelming. She hadn't asked for this kind of spotlight. All she wanted was to attend an event she'd been invited to, enjoy the evening, and celebrate her achievements alongside peers. But now her face was plastered across news articles, memes, and opinion pieces. People dissected every detail of the confrontation, analyzing her expression, her tone, even the way she carried herself as she walked into the venue after being cleared to enter. Despite the chaos, she knew she couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the women and men who had faced similar treatment but didn't have a platform to speak up. So she decided to use her voice. Sitting down at her laptop late that night, she poured her thoughts onto the screen. What started as a short reflection quickly turned into a powerful op-ed. In clear, honest words, she described what had happened at the entrance, how it made her feel, and why moments like these mattered. She wrote about the frustration of constantly having to prove herself, not just in business meetings or boardrooms, but in everyday situations where others took their privilege for granted. She talked about the exhaustion of navigating a world that often questioned her presence simply because of the color of her skin. And she called for action, urging companies and individuals alike to confront their biases head-on. Change doesn't happen by accident, she wrote. It requires intention, effort, and courage. When the op-ed was published the next morning, it struck a nerve. Readers from all walks of life shared it widely, praising her vulnerability and clarity. Many commented that her words resonated deeply, echoing experiences they'd kept buried for fear of judgment or retaliation. Women of color in particular thanked her for speaking truths they'd long felt but struggled to articulate. Her piece became more than just an article. It became a rallying cry for change. Meanwhile, the fallout continued to ripple through the tech company responsible for hosting the event. The CEO, still reeling from the backlash, realized that firing the security guard wasn't enough. If anything, it had only scratched the surface of a much larger problem. Under pressure from stakeholders, employees, and the public, he announced a series of reforms aimed at addressing systemic bias within the organization. Mandatory diversity training programs were rolled out for all staff members, from entry-level employees to top executives. Hiring practices were reviewed and revamped to ensure greater representation across leadership roles. Anonymous feedback channels were introduced so workers could report incidents without fear of retaliation. But perhaps the most surprising development came when she reached out to the security guard personally. It wasn't something anyone expected, least of all him. After losing his job, he had retreated into isolation, grappling with shame and regret. News outlets painted him as the villain of the story, and friends distanced themselves, unsure of how to react. For days, he replayed the moment in his mind, wondering if he could have handled things differently. Then, one afternoon, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, he answered. To his astonishment, it was her, the very person he'd stopped at the door. At first he stammered, unsure of what to say. He expected anger, accusations, maybe even silence. Instead, she greeted him warmly, her tone calm and understanding. "I'm not calling to blame you," she began. "I know you didn't set out to hurt anyone, but I think we both agree that what happened wasn't right. And I believe there's an opportunity here for both of us to learn and grow." Her words caught him off guard. No one had spoken to him with such compassion since the incident. Slowly, he opened up, admitting that he hadn't realized the impact of his actions until it was too late. He confessed that he worked multiple jobs to support his family, and that losing this position had left him scrambling to make ends meet. More importantly, he acknowledged that he needed help recognizing and unlearning the biases he hadn't even known he carried. Moved by his honesty, she offered to connect him with resources, workshops, mentors, and organizations dedicated to fostering inclusivity in professional environments. She also encouraged him to share his perspective publicly, emphasizing that real progress required input from everyone, not just those directly affected by discrimination. Though hesitant at first, he agreed, seeing it as a chance to redeem himself and contribute to meaningful change. Their conversation marked a turning point, not just for them individually, but for the broader narrative surrounding the incident. When word got out that she had extended an olive branch, critics softened their stance. Some even praised her for demonstrating grace under pressure, proving that accountability and empathy could coexist. Meanwhile, the former guard began attending workshops, learning how to identify unconscious bias and implement inclusive practices in his daily interactions. As weeks turned into months, the effects of the incident rippled outward. The tech company that hosted the gala emerged as a leader in promoting workplace equality, setting an example for other organizations to follow. Conversations about race, privilege, and representation gained momentum, sparking initiatives aimed at dismantling barriers in various industries. And for her, the experience reinforced her commitment to using her platform to uplift others. Though the night had started with tension and humiliation, it ultimately became a catalyst for transformation. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel hopeful, not because everything was perfect, but because people were finally paying attention. Change was never easy, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. But as she stood on stage at a conference months later, delivering a keynote speech to a packed auditorium, she reminded the audience of one simple truth. Progress begins when we choose to confront uncomfortable realities, not with silence but with courage. The months following the gala were a whirlwind of activity, reflection, and growth, not just for her, but for countless others who found themselves inspired by what had unfolded. The incident that began with a humiliating moment at the door had spiraled into something much bigger, a movement. It wasn't just about one security guard or one company anymore. It was about challenging the systems and attitudes that allowed such moments to happen in the first place. For her, the woman, who had been stopped, the experience became a turning point, a chance to channel frustration into purpose. She didn't want the story to end with outrage or apologies. She wanted real, tangible change. So she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Leveraging her influence as a successful entrepreneur, she launched a mentorship program aimed at supporting women of color in business. The initiative provided resources, networking opportunities, and guidance to help participants navigate the challenges they often faced in male-dominated industries. The response was overwhelming. Applications poured in from aspiring entrepreneurs, mid-career professionals, and even young students dreaming of breaking into tech or finance. What struck her most was how many applicants shared stories similar to hers. Stories of being underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed simply because of their race or gender. These narratives reinforced why the program was so desperately needed. Each story fueled her determination to create a space where these women could thrive without constantly having to fight for recognition. But she didn't stop there. Recognizing the power of storytelling, she started hosting panel discussions and workshops inviting industry leaders, activists, and everyday people to share their experiences with bias and discrimination. These events weren't just about airing grievances. They were about finding solutions. Attendees brainstormed ideas, exchanged advice, and built connections that would carry them forward. Slowly but surely, a community began to form, united by a shared vision of equity and inclusion. Meanwhile, the former security guard embarked on his own journey of transformation. After losing his job, he initially struggled to find steady employment. Many potential employers hesitated to hire him once they learned about the viral incident. But instead of letting bitterness take hold, he leaned into the lessons he'd gained from the workshops and mentorships recommended by her. He realized that this setback could be an opportunity to reinvent himself, to become someone who actively contributed to creating fairer, more inclusive spaces. Determined to make amends, he began volunteering with organizations focused on workplace equality. At first, he kept a low profile, unsure of how others would react to his presence. But over time, his sincerity won people over. During training sessions, he openly shared his side of the story, not to excuse his actions, but to highlight how easy it was to perpetuate bias unintentionally. His honesty resonated with many attendees, some of whom admitted they had made similar mistakes in the past. By speaking candidly, he helped humanize the issue, making it easier for others to confront their own blind spots. As word of his efforts spread, doors began to open again. A local nonprofit offered him a position as a diversity trainer, tasked with educating staff members on recognizing and addressing bias. It was a role perfectly suited to his newfound passion for fostering understanding and accountability. For him, it felt like redemption, a chance to rebuild not just his career but also his sense of self-worth. Back at the tech company that hosted the gala, the reforms announced in the wake of the incident started bearing fruit. Employees reported feeling more comfortable discussing issues of race and privilege in the workplace, knowing their concerns would be taken seriously. Leadership teams grew more diverse, bringing fresh perspectives to decision-making processes. Even clients noticed the shift, praising the company for its commitment to inclusivity. While there was still work to be done, the progress was undeniable. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying the message, too. Hashtags like #PrideCheer and Bias Exposed continued to trend long after the initial incident faded from headlines. Influencers and activists used their platforms to keep the conversation alive, sharing personal anecdotes and calling out examples of systemic inequality wherever they saw them. Memes, videos, and threads sparked lively debates, ensuring that no one forgot the importance of addressing bias head-on. One particularly impactful campaign encouraged people to reflect on their own biases. Dubbed the Mirror Challenge, it invited participants to record themselves talking about a time they caught themselves making assumptions based on someone's appearance or background. The goal was to normalize admitting fault and learning from mistakes. Thousands joined in, posting heartfelt videos that ranged from humorous to deeply moving. Some confessed to judging colleagues unfairly. Others recalled dismissing strangers in line at coffee shops. Together, these stories created a tapestry of vulnerability and growth, reminding everyone that no one was immune to bias. But everyone had the power to unlearn it. Through it all, she remained a guiding force, using her platform to shine a light on the progress being made while acknowledging the work still ahead. In interviews, speeches, and social media posts, she emphasized that change wasn't linear. It required constant effort and vigilance. Yet she never lost sight of the optimism that had driven her from the start. Every small victory, every new connection, every policy reform brought her closer to the future she envisioned, one where no one had to prove they belonged. And yet, she knew better than anyone that this fight wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone. The women breaking barriers, the men challenging toxic norms, the allies stepping up to listen and learn. Even the former security guard, once vilified, now stood as proof that redemption was possible when people committed to doing better. Together they formed a patchwork of hope, resilience, and determination, a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there was always room for healing and transformation. By the end of the year, the ripple effects of that single, Night at the gala had touched lives far beyond what anyone could have imagined. From corporate boardrooms to grassroots movements, conversations about race, privilege, and respect had taken center stage. And though the road ahead remained long and uncertain, one thing was clear. The seeds of change had been planted, and they were beginning to grow. Months turned into years, and the impact of that one fateful night at the gala continued to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a single incident, a moment of bias at a luxury event, had grown into something far greater. A legacy of change, resilience, and hope. For her, the woman who had been stopped at the door, the journey was both personal and universal. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating a world where others wouldn't have to face the same indignities she did. Her mentorship, Program for Women of Color, became a beacon of empowerment, attracting attention from all corners of the globe. Women from different backgrounds, industries, and walks of life came together under its umbrella, united by a shared mission to break barriers and rewrite the rules. The program didn't just offer resources, it fostered a sense of community. Participants formed bonds that went beyond professional networking. They became sisters in arms, supporting each other through challenges big and small. Stories of success poured in, startups launched, promotions secured, dreams realized. Each achievement was a testament not only to their individual hard work, but also to the power of collective support. One participant, a young tech entrepreneur struggling to secure funding for her app, credited the program with giving her the confidence to persevere. "Before joining," she said during a panel discussion, "I doubted myself every step of the way. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or connected enough. But being around women who looked like me and understood my struggles, it changed everything. Now, I know I belong here." The ripple effect extended beyond the individuals involved. Companies began reaching out, eager to partner with the program and learn how they could implement similar initiatives within their own organizations. Investors took notice too, pledging funds specifically earmarked for businesses led by women of color. Slowly but surely, the landscape of entrepreneurship began shifting, becoming more inclusive and reflective of the diverse talent pool that existed. Meanwhile, the former security guard found his footing in his new role as a diversity trainer. At first, he worried he wouldn't be taken seriously. After all, who would listen to someone whose mistake had gone viral? But over time, he proved himself through dedication and authenticity. His workshops weren't lectures, they were conversations. He encouraged participants to share their own experiences, fostering an environment where vulnerability was seen as strength rather than weakness. One memorable session stood out among many. A middle-aged executive broke down in tears as he recounted dismissing a junior employee's idea during a meeting simply because of her accent. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he admitted, his voice trembling. "But hearing these stories makes me realize how much damage we can do without even realizing it." Moments like these reminded him why he had chosen this path, to help people see the humanity behind the biases they carried. His efforts earned him recognition not just locally, but nationally. Media outlets featured his story, highlighting his transformation from scapegoat to advocate. Schools invited him to speak to students, emphasizing the importance of self-awareness and accountability from a young age. Even law enforcement agencies reached out, asking for guidance on addressing racial profiling in their ranks. Through it all, he remained humble, acknowledging that he still had much to learn himself. Back at the tech company that hosted the gala, the reforms continued to evolve. What began as mandatory training sessions blossomed into a culture of openness and reflection. Employees were encouraged to speak up when they witnessed bias, knowing their voices would be heard without fear of retaliation. Leadership actively sought feedback, using it to refine policies and practices. The company even established a scholarship fund for underrepresented students pursuing careers in technology, ensuring that future generations would have opportunities they might otherwise lack. Social media played a pivotal role in sustaining momentum. Campaigns like Taka Respect Her and Bias Exposed inspired countless spin-offs, each tailored to specific communities and causes. TikTok creators made videos explaining microaggressions in relatable terms. Instagram influencers shared book recommendations focused on anti-racism and allyship. Twitter threads dissected systemic issues while offering actionable steps for improvement. Together, these efforts kept the conversation alive, reminding everyone that progress required ongoing commitment. For her, the culmination of this journey came during a keynote speech at a global conference several years later. Standing on stage before thousands of attendees, she reflected on how far they'd come since that night at the gala. "Change isn't easy," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "It demands courage, not just from those who challenge the status quo, but also from those willing to listen and grow. And let me tell you, there is immense beauty in growth." She paused, scanning the audience. Faces of all colors, ages, and genders stared back at her, each carrying their own stories of struggle and triumph. Then with a smile she added, "We often think of justice as punishment, an eye for an eye. But true justice is about restoration. It's about building bridges instead of walls. It's about learning from our mistakes so we don't repeat them." Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. As she stepped off the stage, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not because she had won or proven anyone wrong, but because she had contributed to something bigger than herself. She had helped ignite a movement that would continue long after she was gone, and so the legacy lived on. In classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms around the world, people carried forward the lessons learned from that unforgettable night. Conversations once avoided were now embraced. Policies once ignored were now scrutinized. Lives once marginalized were now celebrated. The road ahead was still bumpy, full of obstacles and setbacks, but the direction was clear: forward. Years later, when asked what she hoped people would remember about the incident, she smiled softly and replied, "I want them to remember that change is possible, that even in moments of conflict, there's always room for understanding, healing, and transformation, because at the end of the day, we're all human, and isn't that worth fighting for?"